Welcome to Water Wednesday. We're going to give everyone just a few more minutes to come in and then we'll start. Not a few minutes, a few seconds. Hello, this is Water Wednesday by the Potomac Riverkeeper Network. I'm Peggy Knutson, the new Vice President of Development. I'm delighted that you're all here today, however somber the topic we're going to discuss. We have with us today Dean Naujoks, one of our riverkeepers, who will talk about tragedy on the Potomac, a riverkeeper's experience. So welcome to you all. And Ashley, I think we can go to the next slide. So most of you probably know us. I was thrilled to join the Potomac River Keepers on January 21st. Our mission is to protect clean water for all communities and for all of those who live in and rely upon the Potomac and the Shenandoah watersheds. And we do this with advocacy and enforcement and community engagement with the goal of stopping pollution, making drinking water safe, protecting healthy river habitats, and enhancing public use and enjoyment of our beautiful rivers. And Ashley, you can go to the next slide. We're 25 years old this year, so somewhat younger than I am. And I just wanted to show you before we get started some of the victories we've had in our first quarter century. We've achieved more than 1.5 million in penalties and fines for water polluters. We've achieved more than $25 million, or we've received more than $25 million in pro bono legal services that have eliminated millions of gallons of river pollution. We've worked to advocate and achieve legislation that fixes failing sewage systems and cleaned up millions of gallons of toxic coal ash. Dean could talk a lot about that topic. We've also achieved in the Shenandoah River regulations for nutrient limits on bio-waste that prevent waste in the Shenandoah River. And you see a cow there. That's one of our chief sources of the waste that's coming into the Shenandoah. And the one that really impresses me almost the most of all of these, in the first 25 years of our existence, we've had more than 5,000 volunteers who've taken more than 3,000 water quality samples and helped us find out where the pollution is happening and spur us into action to prevent it. This has happened at more than 70 cleanup sites, and we have done river cleanups that resulted in more than 70,000 plastic bottles being picked up and 3,000 bags of trash being removed. I'm sure that some of you have been active in that. So thank you, first of all, for your help. And we look forward to working with you in the future as we strive to keep the Potomac, the Shenandoah, and their tributaries clean and swimmable and drinkable and safe for us all. So next slide, Ashley. We'll get to our topic of the day. As you all know, a terrible tragedy occurred on January 29th near Reagan National Airport when an American Airlines plane with 64 people on board collided midair with an Army Black Hawk helicopter that was carrying three soldiers and crashed into the Potomac River. There were no survivors. We cannot begin to imagine how horrific this must have been and must be for the loved ones of those who perished. And we extend our deepest condolences to them in this very, very difficult time. And this slide just shows some of the news, the many, many, many news announcements that were displayed on that day and since then. And I think we can turn off the slide, Ashley. So Potomac Riverkeeper Dean Naujoks was on the Potomac on our Riverkeeper boat on January 30th, the day after the crash. With permission from the FBI and the Alexandria police, he helped search for debris downriver from the crash site, picking up pieces to bring back to investigators from areas that most boaters don't know about or can't get to. So Ashley, I think what we'll do next is play just a brief clip of Dean being interviewed on our local WUSA 9 channel. The clip is about a minute and 40 seconds, and I'll give Ashley just a second to get us back into the slideshow to play that clip.
Member of the Potomac Riverkeepers Network about his experience with this recovery effort.
We're getting ready to head back upriver, but I just keep finding debris. I think this is a sea.
These are just a few of the items Team Naujoks pulled out of the Potomac River yesterday. Naujoks joined the Potomac Riverkeeper Network in 2015 and has been keeping the river clean ever since. When he learned about Wednesday's devastating plane collision, he started preparing to help. Naujoks also knew his experience navigating the Potomac would be vital in the recovery effort.
I knew that there was an area that likely there was a lot of debris based on the wind and the tides and the knowledge I have of the river that a lot of debris went into where most boaters don't go, particularly all the people out there at night.
He says once he was given the green light from officials, Naujoks took his patrol boat and headed out onto the water. He says although he was 2 miles downriver from the crash fields, he still found a lot to pick up.
Pulled this piece of the plane right down here near Oxen Cove, right below Blue Plains.
And the possibility of what he could find weighed heavy on his mind.
It was eerie. You know, you go out there and quite frankly, you're hoping you don't see some of the things you know are in the river.
In the end, Naujoks says he was happy to do what he could to help.
Quite frankly, like what the first responders are dealing with is just, I can't even imagine what they're dealing with and going through. And I was just there to help where I could.
Thanks so much, Ashley. So we've been getting a lot of questions from our members about Dean's experience, and he also has been speaking a lot with the media, as you can see. So we decided to organize this Water Wednesday discussion to hear from Dean about his day on the water on January 30th and his experiences since then. I'll pose just a few questions to Dean in this discussion for the first 15 minutes or so of this webcast, and then we'd like to open up the webinar for discussion and take your questions via the Q&A tab in the bar at the bottom of your screen. We can't have everybody on audio because there are so many that signed up for this webinar. So if you have a question, can you please hit the Q&A tab at the bottom of our screen and ask it that way? The chat function is disabled. You won't be able to type anything into chat. We'll wrap up the webinar at 1 p.m. at the latest, or when there are no more questions from the audience. So Dean, I'll turn to you next. Can you tell us about your experience the night of the crash and the day after? Where were you and who first contacted you with this terrible news?
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And, I do want to echo that on behalf of everyone at Potomac Riverkeeper Network, our hearts go out to all the families of this horrible tragedy. And just a probably one of the saddest days on the Potomac River ever. So, but I was at home like everybody else. I was watching something on Netflix, and our vice president, Betsy Nicholas, called me probably around 10:45 and said, "Hey, turn on the news. There's been a plane crash in the river." And, obviously, um, turned on the news, started following what was happening. I started getting my gear together to go out because I know the river very well at night, and it's very disorienting out there at night. And I was wondering how much help may be needed. But at the same time, I'm just so impressed with our Potomac Riverkeeper Network team. Ashley Flores, who's on here today, and others like Betsy, Mark Frondorf, our Shendo Riverkeeper. We immediately began to prepare a response to this tragedy with the limited information we had. And then Betsy, our vice president, reached out to Dr. Tyler Frankel with Mary Washington College, um, Dr. Natalie Exum, and Dr. Anna Rule with Johns Hopkins University to help get a better understanding about what are all the chemicals in the river if I'm asked, if just to know what is in jet fuel and what other type of chemicals like um, might be in the river as a result of this crash, just because I might get asked and I probably should know as the river keeper. Again, this is just something I've never dealt with. I really was debating back and forth. I was just torn whether I should go right now and get out on the river. Um, but I was watching the response and I was already 2 hours late to the response. And as I watched, it was reported, I think by 11:30 or so, that there was nobody recovered, nobody survived the crash. At least that's what they were initially reporting, which was just horrific. And I just started weighing my options, thinking about the first responders and the fatigue and exhaustion that they must be going through on just this really cold night of dealing with this issue. And maybe it's best that I showed up at first light in the morning and offered some assistance at that point in time. I found out way later, like 1 o'clock in the morning, that they did put a call out for all vessels. But obviously, I was not aware of this crash when it first happened, or I would have responded right away. And I just weighed my options and thought that it was probably best that I go up there in the morning. And so that's what I was doing the first night of the response. And I just want to thank everybody at Potomac Riverkeeper Network for just responding to this at 11 o'clock at night, trying to help this everybody deal with this terrible tragedy the best that we could as an organization.
Thanks, Dean. Can you tell us about the next day when you did go out on the water? How long were you there and what did you
Yeah.
experience?
So I keep our Riverkeeper patrol boat up at Dangerfield Island Marina, or Washington Sailing Marina, most people know it by. And I went and drove to Alexandria first light, and I was worried about roadblocks and just, my car possibly getting blocked in. I just didn't know what to expect. So I just parked my car. I saw a lot of people jogging, walking on the Mount Vernon Trail, and I just walked a mile up to Dangerfield Island Marina. And along the way, I had contacted staff at GSI Guest Services, who runs the marinas, and they had told me that there had been a request at 1:30 in the morning to see if the Riverkeeper vessel was available for search and recovery, which just inspired me more to possibly get out there and help. And so I walked up there and I met with some of the staff, and very quickly was greeted by Alexandria PD, who said that the river was closed and that it was a crime scene. And at that point, I was like, okay, I guess they're not looking for people to go out at this point, and I just respected that. And we talked with the police. We offered them coffee, because they were out there all night, and basically just waited. And I was getting ready to go home. I shot a little video, basically saying the river was closed. Didn't know much. It was eerily calm and pretty quiet out there. It seemed like, while there was still a lot of first responders up at the crash site, it just seemed like it was just oddly kind of quiet and gray and just a cold day, And so I was actually thinking about leaving to go back home, and then all of a sudden, this pontoon boat, a civilian, came boating into the marina, and we were wondering, like, what is this guy doing out here, And Alexandria PD, myself, the staff at Guest Services, we walked down to greet this guy. His name was Paul, and he had found some wreckage, including one of the seats from the plane. Um, that was he initially felt that it might be one of the helicopter jump seats, and but the bottom line is it turned out later was one of the seats from the plane. And and then they called the FBI. And so we just kind of waited there, waited for the FBI to come, collect all the um, material that this guy Paul had recovered. And I was just kind of patiently waiting for them to do their job. And when he thanked Paul for retrieving some of this, I then said, is he able to go back downriver with your permission? Is it okay if we go out on the river? And at that point, the FBI said, yeah, just don't go up toward the crash site, go downriver. And I told them that I felt that there would maybe, based on the wind and the outgoing tide, that there may be debris over near Oxen Cove, Smoots Cove. And that was an area that I wanted to go search for possible wreckage. Um, and so that's what I did. I got permission and I just immediately jumped in my boat and headed out and went down and started recovering debris in that area. Hey, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I have traffic in front of my window. Were you the only one in that area of the river, Dean, or were there others picking up debris alongside you?
So as I went downriver, I could see that, there was a boat basically blocking boat traffic from going upriver toward the crash site. And I had no intention of going upriver anyway. I was going down to where this area, Smoots Cove, um, and Oxen Cove, it's actually non-navigable. You really need to know how to get in there by boat. There's shallow areas and stumps, and there's also rock jetties. It's literally considered non-navigable. Only like bass fishermen go into that area who know the bottom of the river. But other than the guy Paul, we were the only people out there, and so I just felt very obligated. Like, wow, there's probably a lot of material over in this area where, certainly the search crews last night in the middle of the dark, were not out there 2 miles downriver. But so that's where I went, and it was just us. And Paul couldn't go into that area because he didn't know the river as well. I warned him about the rock jetty. It's called Fox Ferry, and you just really need to know where you're going. And so I just headed over and just immediately started finding wreckage and material, and I was just using my hook for pulling a boat up to a dock to just recover as much material as I could. And there was a lot of small debris in the river, like foam and everything. But obviously, I started recovering, like packets of sugar that the flight stewardesses, had uh, been using and giving out to some of the passengers, and manual for the how to do a landing gear manual from the plane, just pages of it floating around, and then pieces of wreckage. I tried to recover as much of the larger pieces of wreckage as I possibly could. I think I picked up quite a bit, and everything was covered in jet fuel, and it was just it was just pretty intense being out there. I mean, really just uh, terrified you might come across something you don't want to see while just trying to provide help and staying focused. And I was just running a transect up and down the areas where I knew my boat was safe enough to go into the river and not run aground, and just recovering every bit of piece of wreckage I could possibly get. And the jet fuel was so strong that uh, it actually burnt my face. And and I recovered from that. It was just short term, but I was so grateful for that morning to have Dr. Tyler Frankel and some of these doctors provide me the information in email about what's in jet fuel, what are the short term, long term exposures, because I realized I was just being impacted short term by what was in there. But I will say, as Riverkeeper, I'm grateful for the opportunity to not only help, most importantly, but to get out there and experience what was happening in the river. I mean, I really think that's a big part of our job that a lot of people don't realize is, you serve as a witness to what's happening to the river, good, bad, or ugly. And, you're a watchdog and you're a defender. And, at that point, just the understanding of what was happening, and just, to see that much jet fuel that far downriver from the crash site. Again, my thoughts just immediately went to the first responders, particularly the people going in the water. And I can't even imagine what they must be experiencing, the health impacts. I hope there are no long-term health impacts. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist. So I was just trying to, go out there and help and try to understand what was happening in the river that I'm, served to protect every day.
Thank you, Dean. So, this is the most significant disaster to occur in U.S. airspace in at least 15 years. And I just want to say again that our hearts go out to the loved ones of those who lost their lives in this horrific tragedy. The crash is still under investigation, with officials looking to determine exactly how and why it happened. And of course, Potomac River Keepers is not a part of that work. But as Dean mentioned, we have been getting a lot of information about and advice about the safety of the river going forward. And Dean talked about the jet fuel that he was able to smell that day, and it was apparently everywhere along the river. But did you learn more, Dean, about the implications of the crash for the health of the river?
Well, you know, after I moved all the way down toward National Harbor and I found some debris, and I could tell debris was starting to move into National Harbor. And I collected everything I possibly could. And after being out there for several hours, I decided to head back upriver. Um, and at that point, I really started thinking about the polar bear plunge that was supposed to take place the following weekend, literally in not much time at all. And and I was supposed to be part of that. And 300 people jumping on the Potomac River was suddenly very concerning to me about the public health implications. And um, I just feel like if this had happened during the summer, um, that quite frankly there'd be some response from one of the agencies, whether it's Environmental Protection Agency or Maryland Department of Environment or DC Department of Environment and Energy, to test to ensure that boaters and recreational users that the river was safe again. But it didn't seem like that was happening. I did reach out to DC DOEE. They told me that they might test later in some of the coves, an area where I found a lot of the debris. But you have to keep in mind that the river was basically closed. It was under the safety zone. At that point, I guess the following day or that day they issued that safety zone. So I never went back out there, but that's where I guess just my thoughts started shifting toward this possible event. I am very glad to say that they ended up deciding to do a virtual event and not plunging in the Potomac River. But for quite a while there, we were trying to reach out and find if anybody was sampling the river, find out if we could do it ourselves. It turns out it's extremely expensive, like $600 per sample to test for the volatile organic compounds and the PAHs and the other chemicals that are linked to jet fuel and the other chemicals, in the plane crash. Um, so we basically didn't have the resources to do that. And, again, I was relieved that the event turned into a virtual event and they weren't going to plunge in the Potomac River at National Harbor. But it was just pretty intense several days there of just dealing with this issue, not to mention all the media requests, and then the social media. Just some of the horribly derogatory comments that some of the people said, not understanding what was happening out there. And I felt obligated to kind of respond to those and set the record straight, letting people know that I had permission from the FBI, that I was just out there to help out. And I took all that material and brought it back and put it into a cart and turned it all over to the FBI later that day.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean. So, Ashley, I think you can take that slide down. I'll go to some audience questions since they're coming in already. You answered part of one from Glenda Booth. She wants to know more examples of what you found and what did you do with what you found?
So like I said, we found pages of a landing gear manual just were scattered all over the place. Um, Oddly, bags of chips floating in the river, right? And it's just wild. Entire plane exploded and wreckage everywhere, but these little bags of chips were perfectly intact, floating around in the river. A lot of foam, yellow foam from the plane itself, and then obviously I found a seat. I found a window. I found some clothing like a sweater, um, and but not much of that, to be honest with you. It was more just lots of pieces. I found a handle from I think like an escape, from one of the emergency exit windows or whatever. So that was primarily the debris I found, was just a lot of pieces of the plane itself, like you know anywhere from a foot. So I think the biggest piece I found was the seat and then a window that I
Yeah.
retrieved. And then as I mentioned, I brought it all back and contacted Alexandria PD and put it into a cart that they have at the marinas, and I wheeled it up to and waited for the FBI, and I sat there for probably about an hour. And then Alexandria PD came back through and they said, they haven't come back yet? And I said, no. And, understandably, they were busy. So they just said, listen, we're going to take this over from you and we'll give it to them. And thank you for everything. So it was pretty nice to, and then they gave me a ride back to my car.
Oh, wow. So we have a question from Meg of Chesapeake Bay Magazine. Dean, what is the draft of your Riverkeeper patrol boat? What makes it a good boat for getting into difficult spots like Oxen Cove? What allowed you to help that allowed you to help gather the debris?
I mean, the draft is probably technically, 2.5 feet. I've gotten it into, 1.5 feet of water. Certainly not ideal. You tilt the prop up so you can get into shallower areas. And just I think most importantly, it's just knowing the river itself. The FBI ended up calling me on Sunday, and they wanted to go into Oxen Cove, but you really have to know how to get in there. So uh, the FBI ended up putting their boat captain on, and I by phone guided him in using visual landmarks on how to get in there without running aground. And so Oxen Cove is actually the easier cove to get into, as tricky as it is. But Smoots Cove, there's a rock jetty that crosses the river, and if you don't know where it is, you will rip your prop off. Even I don't care how shallow your boat goes.
Yeah.
You need to know where to go and how to get around that thing, as it just sticks straight out. It's part of an old, I guess, ferry from eons ago before the Woodrow Wilson Bridge was built.
Thank you. So we have a question from Mike C. He says, I walked along Gravelly Point 2 days before the accident, and it was quite icy. Was there still ice on the water when you were there, Dean? And if so, did it cause any issues?
Yeah, so I was actually out on the river the day of the crash. It was the first day, the Wednesday, that the marina was free enough of ice that I could get my boat out. I had to go down and check on our barge, but you know, the while I was dealing with that, there wasn't much ice on the actual main part of the river. But ironically, as I was going back upriver, I guess a lot of these ice flows started breaking loose, and there was just like strips and long chunks of pieces of ice coming down river. And so it was definitely tricky. And keep in mind, while it was happening, I'm getting all these calls from media and asking me if I could get them out on the river and things like that. But we had made a decision that because of the unknown of what we might see, uh, we just did not want to bring media out there. And that was a decision we made. And I was happy to talk to media, but at that point in time, I was just there to provide assistance to recover some of that wreckage. But I will say, when you're trying to drive a boat, retrieve wreckage, dodge ice flows, answer calls from media, it was definitely kind of a hectic day out there on the water.
Wow. So we have a question from a fellow river keeper. Dean, is it Cahaba or Cahaba? How do I say that river? I'm still new. I get to ask. Is it
Ahava.
Cahaba? So David Butler of the Cahaba River Keepers
David, hello.
asks, it's not an easy one, Dean. How do you balance advocating for a thorough environmental response while also recognizing the gravity and priority of recovering victims and the need for evidence in an investigation?
Well, as I said, I was just out there to help that day. Wasn't even thinking about going out there. Really, our response was, we wanted to be prepared if in case like a reporter were to ask about jet fuel and other contaminants. But um, I guess just in my opinion, that this is a short-term exposure, a one-time incident, and I've been doing this for 24 years now. The things that, as you know, David, that cause the most harm to our rivers are long-term exposures, right? we've dealt with issues like coal ash, right, which has heavy metals that leach into people's drinking wells, into creeks, and into fish, into people. And I'm dealing with that now, and I've been dealing with it for 10 years, trying to clean up Dominion's toxic coal ash sites. I know a lot about that. I don't know enough about jet fuel, and how that may impact the river. So I don't want to pretend I know what is going on, or there's certainly people far more knowledgeable than me about that particular issue. But I will say that it was a one-time exposure. And so in terms of long-term threat to the river, I didn't really see that as an issue. Um, my first immediate response, as I mentioned, was just really if 300 people were going to plunge in the river at National Harbor the following week, we wanted to try to get some testing in place to make sure that it was safe enough to do that. And luckily that threat, that issue went away. And and so we just ended up not having the resources. And as you know, as a riverkeeper, we just often don't have the resources we need. Um, at times like this. And so maybe in the future, um, we could have a little more resources for sampling and trying to monitor and assess that threat, but we just didn't have it.
Okay, thank you. We have two questions about jet fuel from Glenda Booth and Whitney Pipkin. Glenda asks, is the jet fuel still in the river? How far south did it go? Is there a need to clean up the jet fuel? And Whitney asks, do the scientists you talked to expect the fuel to evaporate, or do you expect there will need to be a cleanup effort and or water quality testing to ensure that water safety?
So one of our volunteers did this amazing job of walking along the Alexandria waterway, and he's a scientist himself. I don't want to mention his name, but he runs a lab. And I this is something I hadn't thought about because I was just in the moment, but apparently, a lot of that jet fuel had volatilized, and then came down to, as atmospheric deposition on rooftops in Alexandria. And if you remember the Friday after the incident, after the plane crash, it had rained that day, and this is runoff that he documented from rooftops in Alexandria of jet fuel, and you can see the sheen, and then you can see the fish kills in the water. And my understanding of jet fuel is that it does volatilize into the air. But there is some heavier parts of that can sink into the water column based on my limited knowledge. Um, so basically, again, my first response was testing for public health if people were plunging in the river at National Harbor. But then once we realized that was no longer an issue, moved toward, is there going to be some kind of testing? Um, and DC DOE is in charge of this area. So reporters have asked me, and I've just told them to contact DC DOEE. In fairness to them, the river was closed till February 14th. And I do think it's worth mentioning that while the river has been open and the safety zone is lifted, there is still a safety zone and a no wake zone right over the two areas where the helicopter and the plane crashed is a no wake zone and still considered a safety zone. Um, and so I just feel like we should let people know that. But as far as the jet fuels goes, I obviously as Riverkeeper, I would love it if some agency like the Environmental Protection Agency or Maryland Department of the Environment or DCDOE actually did some sampling just to let the public know if there are any long-term threats or concerns that groups like mine need to be made aware of. I just don't know of any, and I don't really have the resources to
Yep.
deal with the issue.
And you don't know how far south the jet fuel it went. We don't know.
I don't think
Okay.
anybody does, I
Yeah.
mean, nobody's really, I mean, and that was the one thing I will say, we did talk to other people from John Hopkins, these experienced modelers who were suggesting that modeling this would be really, really helpful. But again, the only way to inform modeling is you need data, right? We needed some sampling data. Our volunteer Wes actually did collect some samples pretty early on. Those are sitting, in a freezer. We just, again, it's just so expensive to do the sampling. I was hoping that maybe some other agency might do it, but again, I totally understand that, the priority was on removal of uh, both aircrafts and body recovery, and so you know, I just felt like I understood that that was a more urgent priority, and I respected it. But as Riverkeeper, it is my job to make sure that the river's safe, and we're if there's information out there, I would love to know about it. If there's some agency that's done some testing that I'm just may not be aware of.
Thank you, Dean. So I see one person has raised a virtual hand. I'll just repeat, they might be latecomers to this webinar. Because there are so many listening in, we're unable to have questions asked live verbally, but you are welcome to click on the Q&A tab on your Zoom screen below, not the chat, but the Q&A, and type in your questions, and I'll ask them of Dean. So from Greg Kreider, Dean, do you ever have a helper when you go out on your boat, or do you primarily go solo?
Uh, when we do an investigation of a pollution like coal ash or whatever, yeah, we always go with other people from our team. We're out there. I mean, a lot of what we do, if you're not familiar with Potomac Riverkeeper Network, we do a lot of litigation against polluters. Every case, every issue we investigate, we go into it thinking that we might be suing a polluter. So we do our due diligence with documentation. If we're doing sampling, we make sure it goes to a state or EPA certified lab. We've met all the proper chains of custody, and just being very careful to make sure that none of the evidence that we document from a pollution incident gets thrown out of court, right? And we've never had that happen because we are so careful. But this case was just different, right? I mean, it was I was up all night and decided to go out there to see if I could help. I wasn't thinking of it in terms of how I normally would proceed as riverkeeper when investigating a pollution source. I was just there to help and provide assistance.
Thank you. And from Jim Fries, or Fries, not sure how he pronounces it. Dean, you mentioned going downstream from the crash site. Based on your knowledge of tides and winds, etc., is there any reason to think that jet fuel or substantial debris would have been transported upstream, for example, above the 14th Street Bridge, understanding that there can always be limited exceptions of something floating around? That might be the same answer as how much jet fuel went south. Do you want to chime in on that, Dean?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did think that, and I was certainly concerned. I have a lot of close friends that live at the wharf, Gangplank Marina in the Washington Channel. They had received notice that debris may be, you know, uh, washing into the Washington Channel. Um, when I heard, and that was like the Saturday, right after the crash. When I heard that, I actually went and walked the entire Washington Channel. I went to James Creek Marina, which is right where the Anacostia River meets the Washington Channel, and I talked to all the staff there to see if they had seen any debris. And I can tell you that the winds were still blowing southeast very strongly. So I felt like that, yes, some debris could potentially move upriver with the tide, incoming tide. But the way that the wind was blowing, and it continued to blow for several days that way, that most of the debris was blowing downriver, and southeasterly winds blowing debris over toward the Maryland side. We did get some calls from people who lived on the Alexandria on the Alexandria side of the river, the Virginia side of the river, that there may be some debris right below the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. I let the FBI know that. To be honest with you, I told the FBI I felt like they should set up a better system, where they people could are told not to touch anything, but to take pictures, and that way, if there was a link, that those pictures could be submitted, and you'd have the visual evidence, but also have a GPS coordinate and exact time and day but I never heard back whether they would do that or not. They were just telling everybody, and it still stands that basically, if you see debris, don't touch it, just leave it there and call 911. I thought it seemed a little challenging for 911 operators with no information or no knowledge of the river to try and understand and connect to an FBI agent where that piece of debris might be. But you know, I'm concerned personally, long term, that that we, our organization, are going to continue to hear, uh, not the people are going to file information to us because we have a tip hotline that people are going to be letting us know for months that they're seeing debris and wreckage further downriver as it slowly moves downriver. Um, but but anyway, I just let the FBI know I thought there might be a better way of trying to collect some of that information as time went on. But again, I'm sure their hands are full and they've got a lot to deal with trying to assess what's happening with this plane crash and retrieving all this wreckage.
Got it. So as far as if people do find something in the river, I mean, it's possible that there are still small pieces of wreckage. The current thing they're supposed to do is just call 911. Is that still the case?
Yes, that's my understanding. Yes.
Okay, all right. Um, the Potomac River was closed for navigation for several days, as you said, with recovery operations going on. So, on February 4th, divers confirmed that the remains of all 67 victims had been recovered. Concerning the salvage operations, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers said that 49 of its subject matter experts worked alongside more than 2,000 responders from private, local, state, and federal agencies to conduct wreckage removal operations. On February 11th, it was announced that this operation was finished and the Potomac was once again safe for navigation. Does that sound like what you've been seeing on the water, Dean, since then?
Yeah, I have not gone out since, again, the safety zone was just lifted on February 14th, while they were still retrieving a lot of that wreckage. So I've not been back out there. Um, but now there is a new safety zone just for the immediate and a no wake zone for the immediate crash site area.
Okay. Is that something that we can see on the map that's pictured, or is that outside of this?
Uh, I just saw it last night, the map. I sent it to Ashley, but I don't know if she was able to
Yeah,
put it up. But
no worries. Okay. So a lot of our members who know and love the river.
basically where the X is.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. A lot of our members who know and love the river are on this Zoom. Is there any advice for them as far as, should they stay away from the river? Are there are there concerns about eating the fish that you might catch from the Potomac? Any response to that?
I would never tell anybody to stay away from this amazing river, right? It's
Yeah.
it's it's the lifeblood of the region. It's an incredible river and provides a lot of enjoyment. So go out and walk along it. And but as far as fish consumption advisories, I would just stick with the general fish consumption advisories that, the state of Maryland or Virginia or DC are issuing. Um, for things like, mercury or other chemicals that are in the river. Again, most fish consumption, we know like mercury in fish is from long-term exposure from atmospheric deposition from coal-fired power plants. Those are the things that I think I would suggest that people should be more concerned about. But if you're not comfortable eating fish out of the river, I would encourage you not to. I just don't think there's any way that we can tell what type of impact that might have on fish. But again, I will say it was a one-time incident. It's not a long-term exposure. Um, that is usually where we see, like we have fish downriver from the coal ash ponds on Quantico Creek that have had long-term exposure to coal ash. And we know that fish that have been tested out of there have heavy metals like selenium from long-term exposure to coal ash. I'm not knowledgeable enough to be perfectly honest, but I don't think this one-time incident would, uh, lead to significant biomagnification or bioaccumulation of toxins in the fish that people are eating. That's just my guess. But if if there's people that are far more knowledgeable, we'd love to hear from them.
Thank you, Dean. I'll just pause a few seconds to give Dean his a chance to catch his breath and give the audience a chance to type in their questions. Again, we have a hard stop at 1 p.m., but we can Eastern time, we can close earlier if there are no more questions. And here's one from Mary H. Oh, on February 1, Mary says, sadly, there was a body recovered south of the Wilson Bridge determined not to be connected to the crash. But Dean, were you involved in any of that investigation since it was near the search area of debris?
I was not.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll just give it a few beats. If anyone else has any questions, type them in the Q&A now. Otherwise, we'll move towards a close. And I think, Ashley, you can move to our last slide. So, Dean, I want to thank you for sharing your experience with us today and for all the work you do to keep the river clean. And many thanks to Ashley Flores. Her title is Development Associate, but she is so much more. Much of the social media you see on the Potomac Riverkeepers social media sites is from Ashley and from our three Riverkeepers. And I also want to thank Emily Bupp, our gifted intern from American University, who helped us create this PowerPoint. Finally, our deepest, deepest thanks to you, our community, for your support and help. We hope to see you at our next Water Wednesday, which will not be as grim as this one. And we hope to see you at the river cleanups we organize that will start up soon. We could not do our important work without your support, both financial and in kind. We'll leave this QR code, these two QR codes up for a couple of minutes, especially in case there are some new folks who haven't known us before that might want to donate or volunteer. So once again, we hope you join us at our Potomac Riverkeeper Network as members, and we thank you for attending this seminar today, and we hope to see you in the future. Thanks so much.
I do want to thank everybody for joining today, and those of you, especially who supported us over the years. We have our big Oxen Cove cleanup coming up on April 26th, and it's the largest river cleanup in the area. We hope that you'll join us there for that. And I do want to just, um, I've been doing this for 24 years, uh, and I've gotten some amazing thank you letters for the work that we do. But I got this letter from a pilot. I'm not going to identify who it is, but he was a pilot. Um, and he sent me this note, and I just wanted to read it to you. That he said, I wanted to personally thank you for sharing the video, and thank you for being there and the help in the cleanup. I can't imagine it was easy to be out there on the Potomac during this process. I know it is your job to look after the Potomac, but I don't think I could have done it. It means a lot to me that there are people out there willing to do what needs to be done beyond what you see through the mainstream news and emergent and media, like the emergency crews and the investigators. It was really hard for me to watch the video, but it has helped me through my healing process, as well as given me greater appreciation of what goes into a cleanup after an accident. I also can't thank you enough for what you do for the river as the keeper of the Potomac. I grew up in Maryland near the Chesapeake Bay, and I've always had a deep appreciation for waterways, especially the ones near me. Living so close to the Potomac has given it similar place in my heart. It is the first thing I look for when I'm flying back into the area, as the first indication that I am home. I also greatly enjoy spending time by the river while being at home. Cindy, his wife, who helps us with our cleanups, and I frequently walk down to the river at Old Town, whether it's to relax or for me to get excited about the planes landing at DCA. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for all you have done and continue to do. And so I just want to thank all of you for your support, and thank you um, for your continued involvement with Potomac Riverkeeper Network.
And we have a resounding thanks to you, Dean, from several people here online. Thank you.
Have a great day.